Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick and this is MSFS Flight Plans, a place where everyone is welcome to come along for the ride as we learn about interesting places, see spectacular sights all around the world, and enjoy flying around in some of the most iconic, historic, brilliant aircraft ever conceived of by mankind. Today we are finally heading out on our trip to La Paz, Bolivia, arriving at the El Alto airport just to the east of La Paz, which happens to be the highest elevation international airport in the world and the highest commercial airport in the world outside of China, naturally, who has 6 airports higher than that one. And our departure is going to be from the city of Juliaca, which is roughly 20 miles north of the Bolivian border in Peru. So we're in Peru now. We'll be heading south towards Bolivia, which is where La Paz is. And this airport is called Manco Capac, Sierra Papa Juliet Lima. And their one runway here is gigantic. It's almost 14,000 feet in length, which is great if you're in a really big plane because our starting altitude is over 12,500 feet. And we're going to have a little bit of a hike to get to the end of the runway because there's only one parking area right in the middle of it, which is just fine because I can give you some more of the details of our flight as we make that journey down there. And look what I picked up. It's the new M500 by FSReborn. Not really brand new anymore, but I've been watching all the reviews over the last month, watching people fly the thing around, just drooling over it in general. And I was happy to get into it. I've only flown it on this trip so far, and I've probably taken a dozen or so test flights all over the place trying to find the best route for it, which I'll tell you about once we start taxiing. And I even made a couple little note cards, which I jammed into the top of my little external autopilot thing here, so hopefully we'll get all of our procedures right. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get the battery on and get the ignition and fuel pump on. We'll go ahead and do that. And then we can just go ahead and hit the starter. And once our NG gets up to about 13, we can push the condition lever forward. And I found that you cannot do it with your external hardware if you have it. You have to do it with the mouse and the sim or it will not engage. It'll move the lever if you move your throttle quadrant handle up there, but it won't engage. You have to do it with a mouse. At least I did, which was a bit frustrating until I figured that out. All right, so next fuel pump will go to auto and ignition will go to off. And Alt-Gen Avionics. Alright, this thing is starting up. That looks good. We'll go ahead and get our transponder set up. Get our cabin pressure going. And because this is a turboprop, it's kind of like the Porter. You have to adjust your rudder trim to about 3 degrees to the right or you'll torque yourself right off the runway. Click, click, click. Oop, overshot it. There we go. Alright, so let's just look down my list here, make sure all that's good. Avionics on, MFD on, rudder trim's good. Bleed air and cabin pressurization good. And we got our transponder. Alright, we're in good shape. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn off our parking brake. And we're moving. Even though the air is really thin up here, even at the throttle or the idle position with the throttle, you'll have no problem moving along. We might even have to dance on the brakes a little bit. So there's only one add-on available for this area. The thing I really wanted to show you guys was the city of La Paz. If you haven't been out there before, it is very unique as far as big cities go. So that's what we're flying into to check that out. And this is going to be a bit of a longer flight, about 200 total miles in the air. And the reason that it's so long is because there's probably 4 airports that we could take off from between here and there, just surrounding La Paz, but all of them are about 125 miles away. So unless we wanted to take off from a tiny little dirt strip, we had to pick one of these, and the first one I was trying to go from was south of La Paz, and I flew up over the Andes, which was just beautiful. But there was nothing but the Andes to look at or talk about, so that would have been a lot of me talking about the Andes. I didn't want to do that. We'll have at least a few towns to check out here. We got Lake Titicaca to fly by, so I'll tell you about that stuff. But the only add-ons I've got for this one installed is for this airport, which is a freeware, which I'll include in the video description, a link to that. And then my South Amercian Mesh pack from ORBX, which I always have on when I'm flying out here. And if you fly out here a lot, I would say it's worth the investment to get that, but it is huge. It's 25 gigabytes. So keep that in mind. I've actually reached the point where I'm maxing out I have a 2 terabyte drive in my computer, and I have nothing on this machine except the sim. I have no family photos, all the videos after we're done recording them, I move to another drive. Anything that's, you know, senior add-ons that's not in the community folder, I pull out to another external drive. So all that's in here are the sims I bought in the marketplace and the world updates. And I've even had to starting to pull some of those out before these flights because I've got about 50 gigabytes left, which is just about enough for 2 videos. And this is going to be a really chill flight. I don't know what makes it so relaxing, but I was nodding off a little bit, just flying out here trying to put my bookmarks, so I had to pause it every few minutes to do that, and I was still feeling tired in between stops. So if you feel like you want to take a little snooze, you can go ahead and crawl on back there. We got the pillows set out. We'll serve some in-flight meals once we get about halfway out there. And you can just have a great time. I'll have Chet go back there and wake you up once we get closer to the city. But there's a lot of neat stuff to fly over. All of it looks pretty good. This area, of course, mostly looks just very good. And some neat ancient stuff to talk about. And we'll cover all of it. All right, once we get down to the end of the runway, we'll stop. Once I get turned around, we'll set our cruise altitude, run through a final takeoff checklist, and then we'll be on our way. How you doing, Chet? Your skin looks amazing. After all that mud facials you got out in Iceland there, it's looking good, buddy. So 12,500 feet elevation here. And the one we're coming into is over 13,000. It is up there, way up there. Anything naturally aspirated, probably out of the question for this trip. I'm going to set our initial altitude to 16,000 feet for our target. We'll probably be okay for there. Little nav map says we won't hit anything if we stay there for the whole flight, but there's a few spots we'll be flying a little bit close to, so I may bump it up to 18,000 once we get going. We'll see. Alright, so let me just get stopped here and we'll go through this takeoff checklist. Alright, pump and ignition to manual. And landing lights on, one notch of flaps. We'll get our 16,000 foot altitude set in here. And I'm just adjusting it as usual on my external hardware because I don't want to have to keep fiddling around with those tiny little buttons with a mouse. So that's what's going on. Alright, 16,000, check our altimeter. Alright, that's set. And we want to keep our torque level to under 1200 for takeoff. We can get a little bit above that at this altitude once we're cruising, but I started overspeeding if I got over about 1100, so we're going to dial it back a little bit once we get going. And with that, let's do this. Yeah, I was shocked that there was not an add-on of any kind available for the airport in La Paz. There's a payware add-on for this airport too if you feel like you're going to be out here a lot. I definitely wouldn't be enough to invest in that, but it was like $8. It's on sale right now at Sim Market for another 15 days at least. Happy New Year's, by the way, to everybody. Alright, pull that throttle back just a little bit. I think there was one freeware for El Alto, but it wasn't like a total overhaul. It was just one of those that touched up a few little things. But despite that, this area looks really nice. Of course, the buildings are all default, but most of them look pretty true to life. And man, if you let back on the yoke at all, because the air is so thin, it just starts coming right down. So we'll keep some back pressure, get our wheels up to pick up some airspeed, leave the flaps out until we get to the top of our flap zone. Alright, flaps up, and autopilot on, nav, vertical speed. And we'll come up at 1,000 feet a minute. I'm not singing, sister. I'm good. We're good. Alright, we're in the air. Everything's looking good. Flaps up, gears up. We're tracking along just fine. Tracking along just fine. If we're real close to the ground like this, it's going to look a little bit splotchy. Once we get up to our cruising altitude, it'll look great. Very believable. Looks good. Of course, the mountains all look great. We're not going to actually cross into the Andes on this flight. I guess technically maybe we're in the Andes now, but not the really high stuff over there. We're kind of in a valley between them because we're going to turn around and get going the other direction, but La Paz is right on the western edge of the Andes. It's built into the side of the Andes, which is what makes it so cool. And that's why I had to turn the live weather off. It was all fogged in when I got out there, so I just have the high cloud setting right now. Alright, once we get turned around here, back towards the southeast, we'll see the city of Juliaca, which is the one that's serviced by this airport. And this was another one of those places where, despite being a fairly large city for this area, when I clicked on things to do in Google, which I always do when we're cruising over a new city just to see if there's any landmarks people like to visit, there was nothing, literally nothing, which will sometimes happen for little tiny places, but not for something this big. So I don't know what they're doing for fun down there. I read they do have a big carnival out here each February, so at least they've got that to look forward to. But apparently the reason this place got to the size that it did is because it's kind of a big transportation hub for people going from southern Peru into Bolivia. That river looks pretty good. That looks a little bit flat there, but that looks good. They didn't just draw something over the top of it, which is nice. All these mountains look good. So here comes the city out here. This whole area out here. And every one of these, no matter how small it is, has a big soccer stadium in it, because that is a big deal out here. So I guess they could have put something to do on that place out here, unless they're not using it. But you can see it's pretty big. They got a little over 300,000 people down there. And Chicago better watch its back, because this place also wears the Windy City tag. And I'm not sure just how windy it actually gets. When I had the live weather on, it was gusting to about maybe 20 knots, which is a pretty stiff breeze. But if Chicago ever comes down here to litigate the name Windy City, this place can always fall back to Sock City. Apparently they do a lot of knitting out here in Juliaca. Windy City sounds a little bit cooler. They could make wind socks. That'd be a good idea. I'm not even going to mention what Chet does with his socks. Sicko. The name of this town comes from the indigenous phrase Titicaca, Q-A-Q-A is that second word, which loosely translates to the type of dew that forms on rocks. I didn't even know there was a name for that. But apparently they got some local hills down here that have a lot of quartz content, and it kind of looks like dew when sunlight hits it, so they say. And the first humans moved out to this place around 4000 BC, so it's pretty old. And they weren't the transitory type either. They raised llamas and guinea pigs out here. And if that sounds familiar, I mentioned those little rascals being a culinary staple out in these parts, and we took our Sucre flight about a month ago, which is also not too far from here. Yeah, see that river? It looks a little bit funny. Some of the bridges are a little bit fuzzy. Some of the other spots will look even better than that. And there's big Lake Titicaca. And speaking of recent flights, we're only about 100 miles away from the area where we took that recent trip in the F-35. And that was an incredible flight. I didn't know we were that close to it until I saw it on a little nav map at the end, but we were really kind of hanging out in this area. And I apologize about that. We're camping out here in the Andes, but everything just looks so amazing. In fact, it's such a high bar that I'm afraid I might need an intervention to move away from this area. But there's a lot of incredible stuff to explore out in the world, and I just need to accept that most of it's not going to look as good as this does. And you know, when I think about it, pretty much everything we've flown over in Africa also is at about this level of terrain quality. Really, really good. Which is more than a little bit ironic, because South America and Africa have been mostly untouched by the world updates. In fact, some of the worst looking terrain is from the world update area, so I don't know what's going on with that. And while I'm on that soapbox, I flew out to Croatia earlier this week because they added a ton of POIs out there in that Eastern European update. And I checked out some of them. They got a few castles out there, which were neat. We'll check those out eventually. We'll record a flight out there. But I couldn't believe how many of them were things that either nobody would care about, like an ordinary bridge somewhere, or a radio mast, or some museum that looks just like everything else around it. And a lot of them were just out in the middle of nowhere. So you're probably not flying low and slow to check it out because there's nothing else to see on the way. And if you're cruising by on a liner, you'd be too high to see anything. So I guess I can't see the point of putting all that effort into modeling stuff like that. So if anybody from Asobo cares, if I was to make any recommendation, I'd say maybe consider ignoring all the tiny insignificant landmarks out in flyover country, because there's plenty of modders that are doing that stuff anyway. But I'd rather see them tackle just a few cities here and there and just really do them up. Take them to the hilt. Maybe instead of just modeling 2 or 3 things in 20 cities, flip that around and do 20 things in 2 or 3 cities, which might be a more efficient use of resources in my opinion. Alright, we're going to come over these mountains here, and then we're going to come to the town of Puno. And this is also the first place that we've flown over, at least the first one I'm aware of, where the primary economic driver is black market goods. I guess they smuggle a lot of stuff up here from the border with Bolivia. So if you're thinking about getting into the guinea pig business, it might be worth making some connections out here. Alright, just so we don't overspeed, I'm going to pull the throttle back just a little bit, because she will let us know about that too. And we're slowly creeping up there. Alright, that should be good. But this town was established in 1668 by the Spanish, which was far from one of their first places they built out here. But those guys were not in the guinea pig business, they were in the salvation business. They built a bunch of old churches out here, which are still standing. You can go and visit them today. But I think underneath the facade of saving souls, they were really looking for gold and silver, which is what put Sucre on the map, and partially about what put La Paz on the map, as a matter of fact. In real life, this whole area out here, and I don't know, this water level has changed a lot over the years. I'll tell you more about that when we get to the lake, but in real life, at least from the satellite images, you can actually see exposed land out in this whole area out here. It's a little bit deeper in here, but then there's like a big, you know, like a boat channel, like a dredge channel that goes out through the middle of it, and all this here looks to be dry land, at least in the satellite image. So this town up here, you can see it's kind of pinched. It's about 2 miles across from the shoreline to these mountains over here, which has not been a great thing for the poorer socioeconomic class, because as the urban sprawl has jammed more and more people close to the waterline, all the poor folks have had to go up into the mountains, which might not be too bad because the views are probably wonderful, but they're not building any roads up there, so you can't drive a car up there, which means you're either biking or riding a donkey maybe, or a llama, or just walking. So you probably don't need to do a lot of squats out here. Look at that terrain down there. Phenomenal. Looks awesome. Alright, see all this stuff out here? These are called floating islands. They're all little man-made islands, and the whole community is an indigenous group known as the Euros, U-R-O-S. And they build these things, and they have like, there's hundreds of them out there. They have little yards and trees, and it's really cool. A couple little houses on each one of them, and they make them all out of really tight bundles of reeds, which is very interesting. So if I had to move out here and I didn't have a lot of money, and my options were moving up to the mountains with no roads, or building my own island, yeah, probably do the island. That stadium looks very lifelike for a default stadium. That's pretty accurate. This is also accurate, whatever that thing is. The rest of this town, unlike Juliaca to a certain extent, looks very good. Really good. Well, look at that. I didn't notice that before, and we're probably going to fly over it, so I'm not going to be able to see what that is. Look at that thing. I'll have to try to remember to see if we can spot that on a little nav map. I'll put a bookmark on it and go back and see what that is. And dragon boat racing is a big deal out here, which is those things that are, they look like Viking ships, but they're made out of big reed bundles. Kind of part of the festivities. And I read also that this place is a big destination for natives moving down from the mountains, looking for better work and education, and building their own little island, which would be good enough reason for me to come out here. Alright, right down here, I think it's going to be probably right on, I couldn't tell looking down on the top of it because you can't really tell the elevation, but there's a landmark out here that's probably going to be on this spot right here. It's called Tuni Huri, and that is a collection of stone walls and human-shaped monoliths up on the top of a big terraced plateau, which is probably what this thing is right here. We'll see the terracing, I think, but it's maybe not as flat as I thought it would be when I was looking down from the top. And they think that dates to around 500 BC, which would significantly predate the Incans, so no one's really sure what it was for or who built it, other than it being a ceremonial site of some kind, which is pretty much the universal assumption when archaeologists can't figure out what something is. But even today, some of the native cultures go up there and make offerings to the various gods throughout the year, which I've always found to be a strange attribute of humanity. Not judging anyone, of course, because I worship my sim pit from time to time, but the practice of venerating things of ambiguous origins is something us humans just can't seem to resist. And it happens everywhere. Alright, so yeah, you can kind of see the terracing there on the side of it, and then up at the top, you can barely see it there if you have a big screen. There's part of the walled-in area, but you can't see in the monoliths. They're all laying horizontally now. I saw a video someone took out there. Pretty cool. Alright, this next little town, also down along the coast, is called Chuquito. Or maybe Chucuito. And they've also got an interesting archaeological site down there called Inca Uyo. And even though that one's also named after the Inca, it was also there before they arrived. And that one is unquestionably a fertility complex of some kind, either that or a temple dedicated to mushrooms. I think it's probably too dry out here for mushrooms. And yes, Chet, we'll stop on the way back to get you a souvenir. They got little charm necklaces at a booth down there that Chet wants to get for his brother. His brother. Yeah, right. I know what you're going to do with that thing. So we'll check that out. And if you get a chance to, once the kids are in bed, Google Inca Uyo, Uniform Yankee Oscar. Check that place out. Pretty wild. No questions about what they were doing down there. Alright, here's my favorite archaeological site up here. There's a little town, which is just a map dot really, called Plantaria. And they've got a rather legendary artifact tucked down in there. You've probably seen or heard of it, even if you're an Ancient Aliens fan. And I have to admit, I've watched every single episode of that. Maybe even a couple of times. But it's called the Portal of Aramu Muru, aka the Gate of the Gods. And it's a T-shaped structure carved into a big open rock face that was discovered in the 1990s, or probably rediscovered, I should say. And it's not very big. It's about 6 feet tall, maybe a foot or two deep. But there are some who speculate, without any justification that I could discern, that it may be a sealed portal that ancient shaman would use to travel between dimensions. Which is awesome. But whatever the purpose, it's an interesting place. It's cut into a big outcropping of pink rock that, from what I could gather, is not found anywhere else around here, that kind of rock. So it's kind of an interesting spot. But archaeologists say that because it was kind of a unique rock, it may just be an abandoned Incan construction project of some kind. But that hasn't stopped people from worshipping the spot. If you want to see what I'm talking about, just Google Aramu Muru. You'll see what I mean. A lot of people into mysticism seem to think that that may be something truly extraordinary. That little town there is called Akora. Not much going on there. They got a huge shopping center, though, for such a huge town. It's like a giant mall. Check this thing out here. So it's right along the edge of the water, and look at this ridge line coming across here. And both sides of it are terraced, going up and down each side. And then there's this little isthmus here with a little town on it, which had nothing going on, apparently. I think there's some little cabanas and stuff, maybe a little tourist stop out there. And then some more mountains on the other side of it here. I'll just point that out because it looked like kind of an out-of-place feature right here along the water like that. But there's a lot of out-of-place looking things out here, which is what adds to the mystique. Alright, one thing I want to mention real quick while I'm thinking about it. Since I paid over 30 bucks for this plane, which I'm sure everybody else did, unless somebody gave you a free version for some reason, I figured I'd at least invest the time in trying to learn as much about it as I possibly could, so I downloaded the 148-page instruction manual. In an extraordinarily rare move for me, I read the entire thing, because it was just really, really well done. They did a great job with it, but other than just describing how to operate the plane, which of course they did that, they had a lot of sections about how to use the different avionics, really a lot of detail, more than I've seen in a lot of other tutorials, and obviously these are avionics that we see in a lot of different planes, so that was helpful. Some general flying tips, which I thought were also pretty useful. But the thing that I found most useful were some controller recommendation settings that would be worth checking out no matter what you're flying. If you Google FSR500 manual, you can pull it up without having to buy anything. But the big one for me was the sensitivity settings for my rudder pedals. I found that made a big difference for all the twitchy ground control problems you run into with some of the smaller, lighter planes. And for this one, it helped a lot. So spend a minute or two reading that if you ever run into that issue on the ground. Let's see if it helps you out. And that starts on page 17 of the manual, by the way, so you don't have to try to skim through that whole thing looking for it. Alright, we're coming up on the town of Ilave, which I could find almost no information about at all, but despite that, they've got several interesting structures down here. They got a covered coliseum, a huge soccer stadium, a college that's shaped like a big triangle, and a massive bus terminal. It's like 2 city blocks long, so they must have something going on down here. Alright, let's see what all we can spot. So there's the coliseum, there's the huge bus terminal, there's their soccer stadium. If we were over a little further, you'd see the field down in there. There's the triangle-shaped community college. And this bridge in real life is a truss bridge that looked pretty cool, but they didn't do it up in the sim, but at least it looks like a bridge. They don't have it going under the water, which is nice. And this is really the only river we're going to fly over on this whole flight, and it was not named in the Google Maps, so I couldn't really get any information about that. But since this was a truss bridge, I'm kind of wondering if that might be railroad traffic. I don't know. But a neat little town nonetheless. Alright, see this ridge right up here? There's another spot on top of that that's an Incan spot called the Incan Drinking Fountain. And I watched a video from some guy's travel blog of him up on top of that, kind of walking around. And up both sides of it, up and down both sides of it. And in real life, that's really more exposed and bare than it looks there. And a lot more uniform in color. It's also kind of pinkish looking. And they have some things that look like they might be ritual baths or something carved in the top, and there's a little old Incan tower, and I think this was actually an Incan structure out here, going up on the top of it. But they called it the Incan drinking fountain because they think whatever rituals they were doing out there may have involved drinking one of their local alcoholic brews called chicha, which does sound like a good time. So we'll see if we can at least spot the little tower up there. But because it looks like it's covered in trees or something, I don't think we'll see any of the steps on there. And you know what's just blowing my mind about all this Incan stuff out here? Their empire spanned over 2,500 miles along the western coast of South America, which is pretty much the whole Andean range. And if you're having trouble grasping just how big that is, that's farther than the distance across the center of the United States. Alright, let me see if we can see that. Yeah, they got too many trees on it. We're not going to see anything unless we see that little tower sticking up, which I don't see. But that looks neat, doesn't it? Very detailed. Looks cool. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. But at its very peak, there may have been only, I say only, 10 million people under the Incan rule. And that might sound like a lot, but as far as population density goes, that's nothing. The Roman Empire had nearly 10 times that many subjects over an area less than half the size of what the Incans were controlling. So you have to figure the vast majority of those guys were probably concentrated in areas far more hospitable than this desert 2 miles up in the sky, but despite that, throughout the entire length of the Andes, all the flights we've taken, there's all kinds of little Incan structures all over the place. And a lot of them weren't like little weekend projects. Some of these things must have taken a tremendous amount of effort. I mean, look at Machu Picchu, for crying out loud. You gotta be in pretty good shape just to go up there and take a few pictures. So I don't know what motivated them to do that, but they were definitely some hard-working folks. Alright, just one more little town and then I'll tell you about Chet's favorite lake out here. After checking out some pics of this place from the ground, all I can say with certainty is that it looks pretty worn out. It's called Juli, J-U-L-I, and they've got a beat-up old Coliseum, which I think we'll be able to see probably. An old soccer stadium on the north side of town, some old parks. But the one thing they've taken pretty good care of is an old church, really old, built in 1568. And for such a remote location like this, they've really got some ornate masonry and stuff on it. Okay, so there's the old Coliseum. Their soccer stadium. It's probably that little thing right there. They got a nice looking little square though. And there's the old church. It's right down in here, but it doesn't look like a church. And they built a museum where that old church is too, but I can't imagine they get a lot of visitors out here. Well, look at this thing out here. I bet that's a little lookout spot. Probably get good views from there. Look at all this texturing. Exactly what you'd expect in the Andes. No popping whatsoever. Good resolution. Just fantastic, as always. Alright, on to Lake Titicaca. Let me just pan the horizon for you so you can see how huge this thing is. Not only is this the highest navigable lake in the world at an elevation of just over 12,500 feet, but with a surface area of 3,232 square miles, it is the largest lake in all of South America by a huge margin. Lake Pupo, which is the one we saw on our Sucre flight, is the second largest, but that one's less than half the surface area of this one. And that was when that place was at its largest. If you saw that flight, you know that thing is shrinking fast. But so is this lake. With all these glaciers melting away, Titicaca is also in the process of drying up. And I read in 2009 they lost 32 inches of surface elevation over the course of just a few months. I think it's recovered a little bit, which might have something to do with why that satellite image looks so much lower than it appears here in the sim. So maybe it's just come back up a little bit higher. But due to some troubles translating the ancient languages, no one's really certain of what the lake's name means. Some think it may translate to Rock of the Puma, which is probably a reference to a big sacred rock sculpture out on the Isla del Sol. And that is the island out on the end of this peninsula here. This is the Isla del Sol here. So this is a big peninsula that comes out here. And then there's the Isla del Sol. And this thing is just covered with ancient artifacts and sites. Looks really cool. You could probably see them in the sim too if you flew over it. This big thing out there called the Labyrinth, which was used for some sort of ritual. And all that stuff is out there for good reason. The Incas believe that their creator god Viracocha emerged from this lake. And they also believe this is where their soul will return when they die, which might have something to do with all the ceremonial complexes in this otherwise isolated region out here. But there's another little island which we can't see because it's right on the other side of this one, right over here. And that's called the Isla de la Luna. And it's the one that the Incans believed that Viracocha was controlling the rising and the setting of the moon from. And all that stuff is on the Bolivian side, by the way, so we're getting pretty close to that point. We're going to cross over, and let's go ahead and get to 18,000 feet, because I'm getting a little bit nervous about that mountain up there, which I'll tell you about in just a second. Alright, and climb away we go. There's an interesting bit of history about the lore of Viracocha. Some of you may already know this, but if you don't, I hope you'll find it interesting. Legend says that he first created a race of giants who could not have been any more misbehaving, and he got so fed up with them that he decided to flood the whole region, saving just 2 people, a man and a woman, to restart the human race all over again. And those 2 floated around Lake Titicaca here in a wooden box until the waters receded, which might sound kind of familiar to you. And mind you, that story predates the arrival of any missionaries from Europe by at least 1,000 years, maybe longer than that. And this is not the only place in the world that has legends like that. In fact, there aren't many places in the world that don't, which is something worthy of contemplation in my opinion. And just to add a little more thrill to that whole story, in 2000, divers found a temple complex submerged in 100 feet of water out there by the Isla del Sol. And it wasn't small either. It was roughly the size of 2 football fields, and also believed to predate the Incans. So definitely an interesting place as far as what the heck was going on out here thousands of years ago. And the Nazca lines are only about 200 miles northwest of us, so this is fertile ground for weirdos like me who can't get enough of the most outlandish theories about how all this stuff got out here. Alright, off to our right, which I'll hop in the back so we can look out the right side of the plane, is a wrinkly lump called Capia Mountain. And geologists think that this may be a very old, very extinct volcano, and considering its location, I'm going to guess it was probably also very important to the Incans. Look at this thing. So that's about 16,000 feet up at its peak, which in any other part of the world might seem really, really high, but that's only about 4,000 feet off of the surrounding landscape here. Look at that, though. Man, that looks awesome, doesn't it? But it's got to be really, really old, because it doesn't look anything like a volcano other than it just being kind of piled up in one spot right there. But that looks awesome. Check that out. Man. Very cool. Little hiking trails going up there. Alright, let me get my camera adjusted back to where it was before. There we go. Alright, this little town down here, creeping into our left-hand view, is called Yung-Uyo. Yung-Uyo, I'm probably saying that right, I think. And judging by the satellite images, it appears to be a little bit more modernized than the last few we checked out, which probably makes its robust population of around 13,000 very happy. And over here, this little area is called Copacabana. And right here is a strip that's dirt, so we could have taken off from there probably, although it may be a little too short. But I was certainly not going to risk chipping the paint on this baby, so we just skipped that. Copacabana, and it's not that Copacabana. And after I read that, I had to go and see what the source of that Copacabana was, and it turns out that Barry Manilow wrote that song about a nightclub in Manhattan, which apparently was the hottest spot north of Havana, a very bold claim. But he got the idea to write it while staying in a hotel with the lady who co-wrote it with him. I think her last name was Sussman, down in Rio de Janeiro, also called the Copacabana Hotel. So we'll have to remember to stay there when we take that flight. Write that down, Chet. Copacabana Hotel. We'll get a look at that place, see what it's all about. And it's still down there. It was built in the 1920s, I think. But apparently Barry really liked that nightclub up in Manhattan. And I don't know if that's still up there or not either. I didn't look to see. Alright, see these mountains out here? These are the big Andes, and they're going to run just to the east of La Paz. So we're going to come southeast a little bit here, then cruise straight towards the east. And La Paz is probably going to be somewhere in this area over here. But we got about 40 miles to go, so while we're heading out to the city, I'll take care of a few housekeeping items before I start telling you about that place. And again, if you haven't seen La Paz before, you're in for a treat. Really spectacular looking city. I've not seen anything built into the side of a mountain like that place is. Okay, now my number one bullet point for our housekeeping items. We are rapidly approaching 1,000 subs, which is just incredible. I am just so grateful that so many of you are enjoying this as much as me. But just to make sure that everyone is aware of what's in store for us when we get there, one of our members from Brazil, incidentally, I'll have to ask him about the Copacabana, has helped me set up a Discord server for the community, and big props to him for that. Thank you, Dan, because I don't know what I'm doing in that domain. I've never had a Discord server or even been on one. But it is cool. And we're going to open that up as soon as we hit 1,000 subs to celebrate. And my vision for that is kind of like a pilot's lounge, a place where we can talk about potential flights, planes, review gear, share some simming wisdom, solve technical problems together. And speaking of that, one of the issues that I had with this, and it's not doing it on this flight for some reason, but I kept getting a cabin pressure warning. Obviously, we're at 18,000 feet. So it was showing cabin pressure at 10,000 before. It's just a caution, and it's not showing anything now, so the system must be working fine. But then it started giving me a warning for 12,000. And I went through the manual, because I read the whole 148 pages of it, watched several tutorials. One was made by the developer. I had all this stuff set up properly for the pressurization system, so I contacted the developer and said, hey man, I'm doing everything right. Read the manual, watched the tutorial video, and I'm getting these altitude warnings, cabin pressure warnings. And he responded and just said, watch the tutorial and read the manual. So not very helpful. But it's not doing it now, so maybe it just does it when it feels like it. And I'm not knocking the developer for that. He probably gets thousands of emails from people who are not reading the manual or watching the tutorial. And I can imagine that gets a little bit frustrating. And back to the Discord server. If I can figure out how to make it work, flying some group flights would be really cool with real pilots. I mentioned this in our Papua New Guinea flight, that fly these planes in real life would be really awesome. I know we've got quite a few of you out there if you'd be into that. Once we get that set up, let me know. So once we launch it, I'll start including the link in all of our video descriptions so you can hop on and enjoy that atmosphere in addition to our regular YouTube flights here. In the meantime, and you can do this in the comments anytime you like, I'm always hunting for cool locations to check out. If you know of any, drop me a line. And if you know of a specific route, even better. You know, just let me know the 2 airports to fly between if you don't want to list a whole bunch of landmarks to look for. Look at this stuff here. Amazing. Just so many strange natural formations out in these parts. Really cool. But I'll check anything out. I can't promise that we'll fly it, but don't be afraid to request it, because I do fly all of them that people send in. And it's always good to look at that stuff with fresh eyes. A lot of these places are around where some of you guys live, so you're probably bored of flying over it, but I've had numerous flight requests, and some of them we've recorded for this channel, where once I got out there, I was like, man, this is incredible. So let me know. And on that note, the #1 reason I keep doing this stuff is because I have a lot more fun knowing that you guys are along for the ride. It would obviously be a lot easier to just fly around by myself, but my enjoyment rises exponentially with each motivational comment that comes down the pike. So like the video if you feel like it, subscribe if you want to. But if you do only one thing, drop me a line, say hi. Give me just one more reason to get back up in the air. I really appreciate all the inspiring commentary. I can't get enough of it. Cherish every one of them. And lastly, I've got to take a few days to finish building my chopper rig so I can start practicing with those things. I've got the main part of the frame done. If you haven't been around for some of our previous flights, I ordered a collective and a flight stick from Virpil, which arrived last week, but I didn't want to attach it all to my desk because I didn't want to have to disconnect everything and unscrew it from the desk, you know, if I wanted to just go back to my yoke. So I built a wooden rig that both of those are mounted on, like a big L-shaped rig that I can just slide up next to my chair. And when I'm not using those, I can just slide it back away. And it actually came out pretty well. I'm not much of an engineer, so I was afraid that might look ridiculous, but it looks okay. But now I've got to get all the controls set up and bind it and all that, which I understand is a little bit of a pain. I heard their software is not real intuitive. So if you see a bit of a production pause, either I'm dead or I'm working on the rig. But don't worry, I'm in a good place either way. What? Yes, you can help me work on it. I'll let you hold the glue, if you promise not to sniff it. You get into that crap again, you're going to drive yourself to the hospital next time. Okay, so on to La Paz. If you saw our Sucre flight, and if you haven't, again, you should. It was awesome, and in a really cool plane. Then you'd already know that this place is part of a double capital for the country of Bolivia, among the... Well, I don't know how many other countries have double capitals. I think there's a couple of them that are out there. This isn't the only one, but the other one is Sucre, which is what we flew over in that flight. And I won't rehash that whole story. You'll learn all about it if you check out that flight, which, again, totally worth it. Check it out. But La Paz is the shortened form of the original full name Nuestra Señora de la Paz, which means Our Lady of Peace. And man, it's no wonder Latin folks talk so fast. It'd take forever to say anything with all those words. And people accuse me of talking fast. By the way, you guys probably won't be surprised to hear I occasionally host charity events around Jacksonville where I serve as the auctioneer for their fundraisers. And I believe it or not, I actually worked with an auctioneer back in my younger days. I think I told you about that on one of our other flights. So this speed is about 50% for me. This ain't nothing. Before the Spanish arrived out here, the spot where La Paz sits was already a major Incan crossroads for travelers moving among the regional cities out here. And I guess, I don't know if it's near a pass maybe in the mountains. That would make sense, I suppose. But they'd go from here out to Cusco, up to the big complexes they had by Machu Picchu, which talk about inhospitable terrain. Good grief. And its elevation is right at 12,000 feet, which also makes it the highest capital city in the world. And on a totally unrelated note, it also has the largest urban cable car network in the world. So take that, San Francisco. But at least it's not in China. Yet. And man, it's for as many superlatives that China owns. I have flown over biggest dam, biggest bridges, tallest bridges, longest bridges. All these huge things they have out there, not a single one of them so far has looked anything like it should. In fact, most of them looked absolutely horrible, which is why we're not flying around out there. But so many potential sites that we could check out. And I don't know if it's because of the geopolitical conflict or what, but it seems like the folks that are the devs for the sim just do not want to touch that area. There's a few payware add-ons, which I got when they were all on sale for some of the cities. We did, what was it, Singapore, to look at that port. The city looked okay, the port looked terrible. That was the biggest port in the world. Did not look that good. So that's just a real shame. Too bad. So the Spanish set up shop out here in 1548, which again is just mind-blowing to me. That's almost 100 years before the Pilgrims arrived in America. And it's not like they just hopped off the boat and thought, hey, this looks like a good spot. It was a hike to get up here. I can't imagine too many other places that would be less attractive than this if your lifeline is an entire continent and an ocean away. But they did it. And tin was the big thing they started mining up here. So down in Sucre it was silver. We saw that huge mountain that the legend says was made of silver. The largest silver mine production-wise in the world out of that place. But then everyone wanted to start mining tin, so they started moving out here. So we're going to fly past El Alto, which we'll see up here is going to be down on our left. Head over to the mountains. Cut in just inside of the mountains, then circle around the city, see what all we can spot on the ground, and then come back around from this same direction to land at the airport. Look at these mountains. Remember this mountain. I'm going to tell you something about that when we're coming in. But look at that scenery. Man, oh man, just so amazing. All right, guys, you're going to have to force me to break myself off this area. I do have some other upcoming flights. We won't be back in South America for a while. We've got to check out some other stuff. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But because this area doesn't have any in-sim add-ons or any mods of any kind available, which again is very surprising to me, everything out here is going to be a rough approximation structure-wise, aka auto-gen structures. But it looks cool nonetheless. The big thing is the terrain. I've never seen buildings built all over cliffs like this. But it's all jammed in there really tight, and it's really hard to pick out any of the famous landmarks. But they got about 2.1 million people living down there today, and this is a super modern town. It's got a really high score on something called the HDI, Human Development Index, which takes into account things like income, education level, life expectancy. They say it measures how much effort is required for people to be and do desirable things. So I guess it's fairly easy around here. And this place isn't as high as like the US and Western Europe, and nobody can touch Australia for some reason. But it's definitely up there for South America. So there's the airport right there. So we're going to come around this way. The city's going to be down. So this is like a big plateau. It dips way down. The city's going to be tucked in here. We'll come around the city from this side, come back up from this angle, and then we're going to land that way. But this place, as far as the HDI goes, crushes pretty much all of Africa and Asia, excluding Japan and South Korea, of course. But for as modern as China supposedly is, that place scored fairly low. India was really bad, but they have a huge population out there, and I think most folks are pretty poor. Oh, gosh, I just can't get enough of this. The mesh pack, a big difference that it seemed to make for me, I can't stand, and I was just flying out in the Alps again also last week as I was looking around for places to go. And there's probably an Alps mesh pack, I guess. I've never really looked for one. But everything's really rounded off out there, and you can see all these are nice, jagged peaks, which really, really adds to the immersion factor. So as we come by El Alto here, I'll tell you a little bit about that place. Again, it is the highest commercial airport in the world outside of China. And they started flying in and out of here in 1916. Again, an astonishing fact. That was pretty early in the days of anybody flying anything. And they were using it for mostly military purposes at that time. But they started plans to build a bigger place in 1929, and they didn't officially open it until the 1960s. And then it saw a complete overhaul in 1974, and they named it John F. Kennedy. And they kept that name until 1999, which seems weird. But apparently none of the locals ever called it that, and I can't imagine why they might prefer another name. And the last significant upgrade was in 2006 when they rebuilt the main terminal building. Alright, let me come on down to, let's see, our runway. We're going to come down to 14.7. Let's just start at 15,000. Because I don't want to have to cruise down too fast once we get out there. Alright, 15,000. And we'll come on down to 1,000 feet a minute and pull the throttle way back. And maybe by coincidence, but maybe not, the runway length out here is 13,126 feet, almost precisely the elevation. Which would be a big coincidence if that was not intentional. And they got another little grass runway out here, or dirt maybe. But that's the big strip there. Look how big this city is, though. And this is nothing. Most of it's down in here. Crazy. This is the boring part of the city. Everything's flat out here. And I think the presidential palace and stuff is out here. I couldn't find it. I looked all over the Google map. Tried searching for it, but everything was in Spanish, so I couldn't find it. Really couldn't spot much of anything. They got several universities, but those don't really stand out, so we'll just kind of fly over and see what grabs our eye. And they've only had a handful of incidents out here at this airport. The worst one was in 1985 when a 727 operated by Eastern Airlines crashed into that big mountain out there, coming in this way on descent, killing all 29 on board. And that mountain is called Illimani. We'll get a nice look at that from the satellite map at the end. Yeah, we're getting into the good stuff here with these mountains. This was the only area where my frame rates dropped, understandably. But I think I still got the graphical settings at a spot where we should be okay. That looks very good, doesn't it? Really, really good. Man, it is like crystal clear. Maybe that's why I didn't touch it up. Maybe it doesn't need any touching up. I mean, it looks so good that I probably wouldn't even buy an add-on for this area. Unless there was just something really iconic to look at down there, but there really isn't. It just looks good as it is. Alright, just watching my airspeed here. Drop the throttle a little bit more. So I don't know if there's like a river running through here, but there's like a big green area with a whole bunch of bridges crisscrossing, and I took a really, really slow flight really down low in there one time, which is fun if you ever want to do that down in that valley. All the buildings whizzing by, it was really neat. They got a little antenna sticking up down there, a couple mines out here it looks like. Alright, we're going to take a look at this, and once we come back around out from away from the city, I'll tell you about some of our upcoming flights. These rivers don't look great. That's like typical mountain rivers. Man, I wish they made one of those packs like we used in that PNG flight that just got rid of the rivers, because that was awesome. That looked really good. Cleaned up all that stuff. Alright, check this out. So here's their downtown area. It's down in the bottom of this valley. And there's another little section of it over here. They had a couple of big stadiums that said Olympic something or other on there, but there were so many of them I didn't bother seeing when any of them were because there wouldn't have been time to talk about them. And this is a university campus out here, I think. Any of the areas where there's a little green usually means it's either a public park or a university. How crazy is that? I can't think of any other cities in the world that we've been to or that I've flown over even by myself that are quite like this. Let me know if you know of anything like this, because I'd like to check it out. Alright, give it a little bit of throttle. I'm just peeking it out of the corner of my eye there. So let's see where those bridges are that are cool to fly near if you go real low. If you just come down this way, leave from the airport, just cut right down here and just cruise down through this area. Awesome little flight. Go flight in something really slow that can handle the altitude, of course. It is awesome. That is just amazing. And Boeing and Airbus use this airport a lot for their high altitude testing for their planes, because it's the only runway big enough this high up that they could do that. I wonder what this area... Oh, this is a cart track right here. You can see it right there. See that little thing? Like another little track over here. And then there's a park that is... It's called their National Revolution Park, which I think is going to be up here. It's the only other thing that I bookmarked out here. But that looks just like it does in real life. That's a huge mall right there. Remember seeing that on the satellite image. What else we got out here? I don't even know where their governmental section is. I couldn't even find that. Usually you'll have like a big open promenade leading to it, but I could not even find anything like that. It's just so haphazard. Probably just trying to fit everything in the terrain. That's one of their coliseums there. Look at that. Golly. Just amazing. Man, they even got stuff going on over here too. I didn't think to look at that before. But that's why we got our extra window, so let's check that out. Man, I could really start getting used to this little passenger window back here. And if you click the little button on the EFB, you can even serve some food up here. They'll put food out on this little table. Oh, the table's folded up. If you serve the food, a table pops out there. You can rearrange the pillows to get them set back up. And if you fly around, or if it's real turbulent, the pillows fall down. You can set them back up. Just a neat little touch, I think. All right. Let's get back to the subject at hand. Okay, so we got to start getting ready for our approach. So let's go to that checklist. Fuel pumps and ignition to manual again. Already did that. Landing light back on. Got that going. And we'll get our gears and flaps down at 168 knots, but we got to come out just a little bit here, so we'll keep on cruising for a while. And our approach speed is going to be 85 knots. Probably could have waited a little bit on turning the fuel pumps back on, but might not be safe. Oh, it's doing that deal where everything disappears and grows back. That's alright. Alright, there's another really cool looking stadium out here that's got a big like blue ring around it. I hope we're not flying. Oh, there it is. Oh, is that it? No, that's not it. That might be it. That might be it right there. We'll see. Yeah, that's got to be it. Is that a stadium? Maybe. Yeah, that must be it. Oh, they might not have modeled that correctly. It's opened up in the middle. Is it back behind us? No, I'm not saying. Alright, I got to get our gears and everything going here. I really want to try to spot that because it looks so unique. Alright, I'll show it to you at the end. Alright, once we get facing the runway, we're right about at gear speed, so we'll kick those down, put our 1 notch of flaps in, and start our final descent. But just imagine driving from here to the places that we left from. I mean, there is just nothing between here and there. And that might be, it might be like, you know, the little towns that popped up along Route 66 back in the day in the United States. Just there to service the travelers. So, upcoming flights real quick. I've checked out the Shetland Islands a couple times. That's the northernmost part of the archipelago coming off the north of Scotland, which looks really cool, especially with the live weather on, but it's kind of like Newfoundland was. Very cloudy and drizzly and blustery, but that was a cool flight. There's a couple neat spots to see up there. And there was a lot of add-ons in that northern UK pack from ORBX, so we'll probably fly up there. Croatia, again, I want to check out some of those castles. Turkey, that area up there is cool. The Greek islands, got a couple. One of my favorite landing strips is out in one of the Greek islands. And southern Wales, now that they've done the southern UK pack for ORBX, if you remember, I did the northern Wales flight, which was awesome. The southern Wales flight, none of the castles looked right, so those have all been taken care of in the southern UK pack, so we'll check that out. We still got to go see that big, huge volcano in New Zealand, and, of course, once I figure out how to fly helicopters, we'll spend some more time in some of the cities that deserve a very slow pass, which will be really fun. I can't tell you how excited I am about that. Alright, go ahead and get the gears down, because we're about to make our left-hand turn here. Yeah, so, I mean, compared to some of our more recent flights, which have just really been extraordinary, this one wasn't as thrilling, very chill. We got to check out La Paz, got to fly this incredible plane. So I think it's probably worth it. You might not want to hop right in your sim and fly this one, but at least you got to check it out. Alright, 1 notch of flaps. And that should get us down into the zone we need to be for the rest of our flaps. Just keep cutting the throttle back. Alright, let's serve the food real quick. Just so nobody starts complaining. And if you'll remind me at the end, we'll go and check out the, it's like a little croissant or something that folds out on that table. What'd you think, Chet? You're just looking forward to going and get your little trinket from that shrine. I don't blame you. I'm sure your wife's going to be impressed by that. That is a long runway there. Not as long as the one we left from, though. That was even longer. It's nice and wide, fortunately. Not that we're going to need a wide runway out here for this plane. Alright, we got to get down to 118 for the remainder of our flaps. And we get the autopilot off because it's trying to nose up to keep our altitude. What do we got? A little crosswind? I got a 10 knot crosswind. Not too shabby. And there we go. I'm wondering if that Eastern Airlines flight was flying at night, either that or in bad weather, because that would be a hard mountain to miss. That thing is massive. Alright, full flaps. And we'll trim down a little bit because it's really wanting to nose up on me. And we've got so many other sites to look at in the UK too. I mean, that place is also just awesome as far as history goes. So we'll check that out. The places in Croatia, there's another area. Oh, Romania. I thought there might be some cool stuff out there too because I saw some like trailer flights for that world update that said it was flying around Romania. Looked like they were flying over some neat spots, but I had trouble spotting anything that really looked cool. But we've got nothing but time. We'll check it all out. I can't wait. Going to be awesome. Alright, so the taxiway for this, and this is a cool airport. The GA parking is way back here, so just for the fun of it, here's the main terminal. We may just drive back there just because it's fun to drive over there. But the first taxiway is not till way out here, so I'm going to actually come in a little bit further down the runway just so we don't have to taxi forever. Boy, those are a lot of skid marks in that thing. Look at that. Looks like a drag strip. Be nice and sticky for us. How's our crosswind? It's down to 6 knots now. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. So as always, thanks again for joining me, guys. Once we get on the ground, I will pull over a little nav map. We'll take a look at some of those spots that were just a little bit too fine and small to see from the air. So I can show you where they are. I'll show you those floating islands, which were a little bit too far away. Those are worth sticking around for. I know I'm missing the touchdown point, but I'm just trying to get close to that taxiway so I don't have to roll out forever. And we need to slow down some anyway. Well, we're at our ref speed. Come on. You'd think with this thin air we would just drop right to the ground. There we go. I would have lost some points for being on the center line if this was a landing challenge. I'm just going to have to live with that. So now it's giving us a cabin altitude warning for 12,000, which is weird because we haven't touched anything, so we'll just silence that. Okay. And we're going to depressurize in a minute anyway. Alright, let's just pull off here so I can show you that GA parking area, which is off the beaten path. Alright, flaps up. Fuel pumps go back to auto. Ignition off. Landing lights off. All right. If you are from any of these areas, as always, if I got anything wrong, well, there's a good chance I did. Most of them I've never been to, although I'd like to go to most of them as well. Everything I get is from the internet, and the internet is often wrong, so let me know. I don't mind being corrected at all. You'll never hurt my feelings, as long as you're polite about it, please. Let us know for the good of the community. And we've had 2 different members now that didn't just recommend places to fly to, and good old Dan Buck from down in Brazil was one of them. And our friend with his 2B Creations channel up in Norway also gave me full-blown... Oh, what the heck, I missed the road for it. I'm not going to drive across the grass, we'll just stop here. Like a step-by-step flight plan with all the stuff to see, which was really, really cool. So if you ever feel like doing that, that'd be awesome. Okay, parking brake on, and we'll go through our shutdown procedure here. So let's depressurize the cabin. Avionics off, generator alternator off. Fuel pump off. Condition to cut off. And bleed air out, battery off. Okay, we're good. Alright, so let's take a quick peek at little nav map here. So, just to see how close we are to some of the other flights we've taken, this one was the one from Sucre. So Sucre's out here, and here's Lake Pupo. And there's a huge salt flat, which was really cool. That was a neat flight. That was a really cool flight from start to finish. There was that, well, we won't talk about that now. Just go check out that flight if you want to see it. Here's the one we took just now. We'll look at that in a minute. Here is the one where we went up to, let's see, this was the one where we flew the F-35 up in here to that really cool area up by the volcanoes. Here's where the Nazca lines are, and this was our Machu Picchu flight up here. So all this stuff tucked in this little area down here. And the Inca territory went from around here all the way to down here, which is a very huge area for 10 million people. All right, so here is Juliaca and Manco Capac. Is that what that's called? Yep. There's the town. Not much to do there, but they got some soccer stadiums, just like all the rest of them. All right, we come down here. See what I was talking about? Look at this. So I don't know if the water level was just super low when this was taken or what, but check this out. I mean, you can see the land everywhere. In fact, the little floating islands are built along the edges of this channel here. And if it's like it is now in the sim, they're just floating in the shape that they were. But here's what they look like up close. Check this out. Look at that. All made of little bundles of reeds. And on the Google image, which is a little bit more fidelity, you can see the little anchors they have just tying them down so they don't float away. Well, some of them look like they're pretty close to the shore, pretty connected. But how cool is that? Looks like they got some of those canal boats like they have up in England. Very neat. There's the town of Puno, and here's where all the poor folks are having to move up here into the mountains. But again, all these look like they have roads, so I don't know what they're talking about. Just build yourself an island. Stop complaining. All right, here is where that terraced area was that had the old... Oh, you can really see it really good there. So that's where they had the monoliths and the old stuff that they don't know how it got there or who built it. About 500 BC is when they think that was built. And then out here is where the very unusual and unsavory shrine was, Inca Uyo, with all their little icons. Chet and I are going to be heading out there so we can get his necklace. And here is where the Portal of the Gods was out here. And they said the bookmark for it was here, but that can't be right because it was built in the side of a big rock outcropping, and there's nothing out there that looks like that. So it's probably maybe somewhere out here where these rocks are. I think they got that wrong. Maybe down in here. I bet it's around here somewhere. But it's probably not right there because I don't see any rocky outcroppings for that spot. And then here's Akora. Nothing much going on here except their big shopping plaza, which looked just fine. Look at this thing. This was that big ridge I pointed out. Look at that. And so this is kind of the spine of it, looking down on the top of it. And initially, I thought it was a ledge that went upwards from this way up here, but it's not. This is the spine of it, and it goes up and down each side of it, which is just really crazy. And then they got another one over here. Very interesting formation. And here's Yave, which didn't have much going on, but there's that truss bridge. See that? Oh, and that's not railroad. They got vehicle traffic going over there. There's their college, their coliseum, and their football stadium. And there's that huge river. Look at that thing. I don't know why Google wouldn't have had a name on that because it is a big river for this part of the country. And then here's where the Incan drinking fountain was. And there's, yeah, we could have never spotted that tower. You can see the shadow of it right there, but that's it right there. Where they were drinking their checha. There's Huli with a very old town, their very old complex. They had their church in there, and that's the church right there. Looked okay. And then we get to the big, look at this mountain. That's that old volcano. That thing looked amazing in the sim. That was very cool. And then here's where Copacabana is. At the Copacabana. Yeah, I wasn't going to fly this plane into a dirt runway. No way. And here's where the Isla del Sol is. And I could not figure out where the big puma carving is, but you can see, let me see if I can at least spot the labyrinth ruins. It's somewhere out here. I'm not going to take a whole bunch of time to do it, but let me just see if I can eyeball it real quick. This whole place is just covered with them. Really cool. That might be it there, but it's all, no, that's not it either. But here's where the Isla de la Luna is, which is where Viracocha was raising the moon. And look at this. I got a little village down there. Amazing. Looks so cool. All right, and then this is when we did our housekeeping, and then we came into La Paz, cruising around El Alto as we got our look down here, and that was just awesome. You guys saw it. I don't have to tell you. It was awesome. And this is what I couldn't spot, although I was looking for it. This is where their little National Revolution Museum is down here, which would have looked neat because I bet they probably modeled that correctly. And then here finally was that stadium I was looking for, and I bet that was it. The only other blue thing is this. I don't think that was it, but look at this thing. That might be so new, actually. Look how new that looks. That just may not have been built when they were doing the sim. Who knows? And then we came in for our landing, and that was it. Awesome flight. Give me just a couple days, guys, to try to get my chopper stuff set out. I'm probably going to not be able to resist trying to fly that for a few days. So it may be just, oh, one more trip. I am going to, just in case anyone hasn't seen it yet, a while ago, right after it came out, I got that Rothera base in Antarctica. We'll take the Twin Otter down there on the skis, of course, fly into that place because it looks pretty cool if you haven't seen that before. Just a little short hop. So maybe I'll use that as a filler because I won't have to research a whole lot and I can spend some more time with the choppers. But had an absolute blast. As always, guys, be on the lookout for our Discord server. I'll make a lot of noise when that happens, so you can hop on there if you want to. Can't wait to see y'all again in the skies. Later.